Hello, 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 and welcome to the live stream happy hour. My name's Eric Freeman. I'm your host, and I am very excited to welcome onto as our guest today for the happy hour, Amber with Divine Lotus Designs. Amber, hello.
Hi, Eric. Thank you so much for having me today.
Oh my gosh, we're so excited to have you. Well, I'm going to go through my real quick opening of the live stream little spiel, and then we will jump into and get to learn a little bit more about you and the cool, awesome, cool art that you intersect with. So for those of you who are tuning into live stream happy hour for the first time, this has been happening for over a year now. We started last April as a way to make sure that our artists were still able to connect with our audiences across the county, and that audiences here in our community were able to connect with artists across our area. And so we've been able to feature performing, visual, literary, and all the arts in between. And we are so excited to continue that trend today with Amber. This is also an opportunity for us to remind you of the importance and vitality of the arts to our community. So you're probably tuning in because you're excited to learn a little bit more of the arts and specifically what Amber does, but also the arts need you to also continue thriving and surviving through the course of this past year and in the years to come. So we know that people who make a contribution to one organization often make a contribution to multiple organizations. So we encourage you today to go out and find an arts organization or civil rights organization you care very deeply about and make a meaningful contribution to support them in reaching their mission. It takes all of us coming together and supporting one another to keep the arts alive and making the meaningful impact in our community that we know that they offer. So thank you for being here to be able to support Amber and the many other artists that are part of the happy hour. And thank you for contributing to in our community that make it possible. Whew, that's a lot of words. Cheers. Amber, it's so exciting.
Cheers.
So Amber, let's kick it right off. Tell us a little bit about yourself as an artist and your art practice.
Well, I would say that my art practice, I would divide it into two categories, personal and professional. Mm-hmm. So I have my personal art practice and I have my professional art practice, which is Divine Lotus Designs. Mm-hmm. And literally I made it my job. So I was resigning from the military and it was like, what do you want to do? Make it your job. So that way you have to make art. And I started telling people that I was a clothing designer. And I was like, you better make something. Like, what do you make? I'm like, I'll get right back to you. I'm going to go make something. So maybe most people don't need to go to that extreme. But for me, you know, I had to make it my job. Same as doing massage and wellness practice is like, what do I need to do? I need to do yoga and get massage. I'm making it my job.
Nice. I love it. So it sounds like you kind of dove in almost like deciding this is what I'm going to do before fully figuring out exactly what it was that how you defined yourself, which is a really exciting place to kind of jump into your artistry in, I imagine.
Yes, and I had kind of known for a long time that that was something that I was passionate about. Mm-hmm. I had a degree in business, so that is very beneficial to running an art business. Mm-hmm. And it kind of deals with the back end of things, but there's also a trust in the universe and in information that you're receiving, like, I'm going to do this.
Yeah. Amazing. I love to hear that. And you've also gotten to intersect with Lane Arts Council in a few other ways with your artistry as well, that you served as one of our design arts apprenticeship mentors. So tell us a little bit how you got connected there and what that experience was like for you.
That was great. And it was a great reminder for me. So I got connected from someone else in the design industry who wasn't able to mentor for a term, and previously I have done other mentorships through CPY, and now they're with Big Brothers Big Sisters. Mm-hmm. And personally being mentored, that was something that was changed my life and helped me to stay with being an artist. So something I really appreciate, and that reminder of like, just keep going, like keep creating, get through that beginner phase or that whatever we're dealing with, like keeping it awkward, just keep it awkward, keep going. And so then I got connected with you guys last fall. Mm-hmm. I mentored 4 youth in middle school in fashion design and art as a business.
Yeah. And what a meaningful year to fill that kind of role for students, on a year when education was so all over the place and students were learning from home for the first time for many of them. And, the learning structure was such a new thing for them to learn. I know a lot of students in that process, it was really meaningful for them to have that experience at that time, to be able to have the space of connection that was with other students. And some of your groups still met in person. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. We had a great time. The youth really connected. And it was a routine that we got to come back to every week. We met in person, socially distanced with masks, but to be able to be around other artists, to be in that creative environment is so important. And also to remember that it's like, start with what you have. What do we have here and what can we use?
I love it. I love it. Well, I know that some of the work that the work that you do involves a lot of reuse, and we just talked about this, the altered materials. So tell us a little bit about what draws you to reuse materials, or describe to us what altered materials means, because that's a new phrase I know that for me.
Yes. So let's come back to altered. I want to start with how I came to reuse. I grew up going to garage sales and thrift stores with my mom and my grandma. So it was this connection, and basically out of utility and necessity of like, this is how much money we have. Like, we need to get creative. And so I want to say that it's both and. So it's about being creative and helping the earth and helping the environment and helping other humans. And so being creative and sustainable, I think the question now is like, if you are not thinking about sustainability, are you really being creative?
Yeah, that's a great point, because that's such an important part of society at this point, right? That there is so much waste that we acknowledge, whether it's like the realities of like the limitations in landfills to the issues that are happening in our oceans, that as creatives, it is a part of our responsibility to always be thinking in that forward motion, right? And there's always that reflection, of course, the past and present that comes into the art, but it's also about the forward conversation of what do we do now with this reality or with this history that we're acknowledging in our art. And so that idea of creativity as this forward thinking, solution oriented is a really exciting kind of spark to pull into your art, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I say, being a clothing designer, like, I know we all have too many clothes. There's so many things that have already been made. Like, we could probably stop now and be okay.
Yeah. But then there's that exciting element of taking clothing that is either no longer fashionable, or clothing that is maybe has holes or tears or tatters to it, and being able to find new ways of repurposing that into like a new fashion that actually is contemporary and is exciting, or is connected, right? That is meaningful.
Yes, absolutely. And that's something I'm super passionate about, is taking something that you love and making it better. So I have an example here. I screen printed this jacket. And so part of my professional business is sacred geometry screen printing. So I printed the moon phases on here and some other sacred geometry on the back. So it's like, go through your closet, figure out what you already love that is worn and tattered, and then let's adorn it so it's unique and personable and one of a kind, and then keep it going. And then when that wears out, you can cut it up and sew it onto something else.
Amazing. Well, and it's also like that is also what the practice was for so long with clothing and some of our eras in history, where
all the eras except for
flower
now.
bags, and it's this isn't a new thing either. It's actually a return to tradition in so many ways.
So we're having a renaissance.
Yeah.
And if we want to, you know, take hold of that, absolutely. Like going through what we already have again, like we have this moment to come home and to be like, what do I have here in my studio? I have so much. Let's use it.
Yeah. Well, speaking of your studio, tell us a little bit about kind of the organization that's going on there behind you, because I know everyone's got a very different studio practice and studio setup. Tell us a little bit about kind of like how you manage your space and manage your materials, especially.
Yeah. Well, schlepping fabric is something that I've had to work with as a designer of like, what kind of materials do I want to work with? How much space do I have available? How much time do I have available? And I'm coming to you live from my sewing studio, which is a tiny trailer that I bought in February of 2020, right before COVID hit. So it was a blessing in timing. I bought this trailer, I rented out a room in my house, and then I started making masks. And just due to being in the industry and being committed to being a designer, I was open when the possibility, the opportunity presented itself to create and to make masks. And masks are small, so I got to use a lot of recycled fabrics. I had elastic, right? So it's part of like putting the work in and then also being patient and that coming together. So I would say that my studio is organized by color. That's how I kind of start some of my inspiration, is by sorting by color. Again, I use mostly recycled materials, so donations, things that I found, and you know what you see on the surfaces are projects in work or to happen, and I kind of move things around.
Cool. I love it. Well, that's so exciting to also hear. You know, everyone's got a slightly different practice in how they like to maintain their space and what feels inspiring, and kind of this idea of color coding with some of the. I imagine with the reused fabric, there's one of the unique challenges I imagine with it is also you have to have a pretty creative eye for finding what goes together and what can come together, and how can you pull from this disparate collection of misfits into a new collection of beautiful works. So is that part of kind of that color stories that you like to try and work with?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a lot of times like what do I have, and like how can I bring that into what I'm working on?
I love it. Well, for those who are listening and tuning in, please feel free to drop some questions, comments, thoughts right there in the comment section. We'll definitely pull them into the conversation today. So don't be shy. Let us know what you're thinking, and let us know if you have any questions for Amber that we can pull in. And Amber, I want to pull us back to this idea of altered materials. So tell us a little bit about why that wording, and what does that exactly mean?
Can you pull up the paper photo of the screen printed work? So this is a piece that I did recently that I was using a vintage calendar that I found at Mecca, and I screen printed my designs on top of it. And so I was wanting to make those into greeting cards and researching, you know, the professional ethics around using things. And so what I found out was using the term altered when we list things for sale is appropriate instead of upcycled.
Because altered acknowledges that there is somebody who created something, and you are taking their creation and adding more creative elements to it to make it uniquely your own, but still encompassing a piece of what they created within that.
Absolutely.
Cool.
So I think that part of the philosophy behind this is honoring the internal and the external, right? So we look to external people for inspiration, and we can pull on that inspiration, and then we also need to bring in our own piece.
Yeah, that's really important. I mean, as artists too, you know, when we create something, it is important that what we created is respected, even if it is adopted into something in the future, right? And I imagine that's a big thing in fashion design, is there's kind of an expectation that at a certain point it's going to be worn into the point of needing alterations or recreation. So to kind of utilize that kind of acknowledgement within the altered materials seems really important, especially in that front.
Yeah, absolutely. And coming back to that philosophy of like, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Someone has done this and we can do it again, and that's okay.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Well, I want to get into talking a little bit about your process of collecting materials, because in working with reuse art and getting all these different materials that you have around you, and it sounds like you've got a nice inventory that's going on there. How do you go about collecting materials, and what is your process for just determining if a material is, quote, workable, quote, good?
Okay, yes. Very important into that pyramid of how much time and space and energy do we want to spend on our art. So being in fibers, that's a lot of space. And something that I put a lot of time into. So I have been in business for 10 years. So I have acquired things over that time. So just, yeah, settling in, right? Like working with it, cycling things through. I also like to look at what I use on a daily basis. So in terms of working with paper and fibers, tea and coffee and plant mediums are great for eco dyeing. So I'm moving more and more towards sustainable practices and what can be, again, reused. So I make my coffee in the morning. I wrap some cotton around a rusty metal bit and then pour the tea and coffee on it and put it in the compost pile and let it sit. So more of a holistic practice of what do we used to do.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit about how you determine, and thinking about kind of the natural dyes, is that an experimentation kind of process, or is that something that you're kind of going to the studies and adopting some of the best practices within that? What's kind of your philosophy in making choices there?
My philosophy is good enough. Like, what is good enough? So the example that I have for you is, calendula. It can be considered a weed here, but it's a medicine, it's edible, and it's also a great dye. So I'll make a mandala, a natural altar, right, is maybe a morning practice. And then when those flowers get a little wilty, I'll make a massage oil or make a dye out of them, dry them, reuse them again.
Oh, I love hearing how this intersects with all the layers of the work that you do, because, you kind of mentioned this at the beginning that, yes, art, like the visual art practice, the fashion art practice that you have going on is a big part of your work, but you also do massage therapy and some of that kind of body work and work with people. And so to hear how that practice infuses, intentionally using the wording there, into all these different parts of you, parts of the work that you do, is really cool to hear that there is immediate connection between all the layers of what you're doing.
Yeah. And it's bringing that personal healing art practice in for people. So I do it for myself, and it's something I also want to do with clients where, we do art more as a therapeutic practice than an external professional try and sell it for money.
Yeah. Well, I know we've got a few other kind of pieces of art here to check out, some of your fabric art and screen printing. So maybe I can pull that up real quick and you kind of walk us through some of these pictures that we've got here. Does that sound good?
Great. Absolutely. And part of, so I screen print sacred geometry, which are, just sacred designs connected back to that organic structure of nature, the chakras, the moon phases that you see here. And part of my work is, having local retailers that share the art. So recognizing that it is community work that we're doing and connecting. We have a little foxy cat joining us, so you might see her in a moment. And again, coming back to screen printing on things that you have. And I want to come to also leveraging your designs. So the moon phases, I do big ones, and then my most recent design is doing little tiny moon phases. So this is something that could be a bookmark, could be put on an altar, could be made into a magnet, put on the fridge, or someone could cut up and make into their own art. So I try and make my art something that people can repurpose again. Like, you don't like it, I try to sew it or alter it with as little remnant that you can make it into something else if you wanted to.
Yeah, that's a really cool mindset to go into art making with. That really awakens something in me of thinking about art piece as not a final product. Like, it can be a final product, but also it can be a piece for process.
Yeah.
And incredibly inspiring in there that actually reminds me a lot of like the type of work that I do in theater and storytelling. That as a playwright, for example, you write intentionally to be handed off because it's not complete truly until an actor has started getting their hands onto the language and a director has started getting their hands on the story and designers get to start finding these relationships to what they see in the story. And it's about the community process of creation rather than the individual start and end point. And that's something that I see in that visual art that you're working on, is that you're offering this gift of continuation in so many ways.
Yes, I love that explanation of it. Absolutely. Like, take it and also make it your own and bring it a new life. So I love seeing people who have taken clothing and then they embody it, right? That's it, the embodied art practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, I love that so much. That's so inspiring. Well, I know we got a closer up picture right here of the moon pictures that you were just showing us. So tell us a little bit. You've got a few different styles here. So what is your kind of decision making in the screen printing? Are these all the same print, or do you kind of mix it up a little bit right here and kind of just play with color?
So the printing process that I use is a bit different. They're screen printed and then heat transferred. So they're screen printed by a couple brothers here in town that I know. And that's part of that community piece where it wouldn't have happened if I didn't have them. FCI transfers, full color ink transfers.com. And so I make the image, which is just this one moon phase image. And then they print it at whatever size that you want. And then I heat transfer it. So this way it comes out really clean. It's fused into the fabric. It's really durable. And then say someone could take this and they could put it in an eco dye bath or a dye bath and tie dye it, make it whatever they want. So I love that aspect of it. And I also love that I can screen print at events. So a company could take their logo, we could get it printed by FCI transfers, and then I could come to your office and we could print on all the employee shirts. And this way it's an interactive experience. It's super quick. It's 30 seconds typically to print. And then you also get that experience of making art. So bringing art back to therapy, right? There's this prolonged exposure of like, I feel nervous about making art. Okay, we're only going to make art for 30 seconds. Like, oh my gosh, I did it. Success. And then you can do it again.
I love that. Well, what a cool business opportunity. So anybody who's listening, who's got a business and is looking for some type of fun, interactive experience for staff or for guests or for any number of folks, there's some really cool opportunities there.
Fun.
Very exciting. I love it.
Let me share one more lesson I learned about this. So I used to only print one color, right? Because there's expenses incurred with the printing. But this, because you see I have black and gold, gold and silver, silver and white, white and black, the number of color changes and ink transfers was less, and printing two color came out to less than printing one color.
Ooh.
Who would have known? Right? So there's an idea of like tracking and doing the math and doing the numbers on things where you're like, oh, okay, I'm learning.
Yeah. Well, cool. That's such a cool discovery and such a cool thing to think about that I think is also something that sometimes is forgotten in like the artistic process, especially this kind of partnership where you're working with an exterior partner to, do elements of it to complete your work. The business, I imagine, side of things that you come with skill sets into art with, I imagine becomes really valuable in some of that process.
Yeah. And it's like a piece that it's not my favorite part to do, but then you're like, oh, well, that made it a lot easier. So like you can work easier.
Yeah, art making and the administration of it are hand in hand, and they are always in combat with each other and in tune with each other. It is a complicated and beautiful relationship, for every artist.
Yeah, and that again is the both and. It's both left and right brain, especially if we're doing it for work.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's check out one more of your screen prints. So tell us a little bit about this wonderful cutie here.
Yeah, this is a gift to one of my friends. I screen print and I did some baby onesies a couple years ago, and just that, it's these simple reminders that you're like, some of the onesies had Ganesh, which is the remover of obstacles, right? But this is a flower of life. This is a sweet child. And so having those just like gentle reminders, that's it. It can be really simple and beautiful at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely. And such beautiful colors too. Such like it's so soft and vibrant at the same time. It's a really beautiful color combination there.
Thank you.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about some of the other materials that you use. So let me get down to my right question. You mentioned that you really love to work with fabric. We talked a bit about that, but paper, and we kind of saw one of the examples of paper with the altered material. But tell us a little bit about what draws you to paper as well, and how you like to manipulate paper in your art form.
Well, I think I'm drawn to paper because I'm a little old school now, right? Come from the paper era where we used to write cards and have magazines. And in that sense, I kind of feel like it's like film, like we're losing it and it's something we really need to hold on to, and that's precious and tangible. And it's actually very strong and versatile. So I've started to kind of merge fiber and paper. And you can sew paper, and like we showed before, you can screen print on paper. And that I had an aha moment with that of like, oh, I've been doing fiber, but I could do paper. So I also took my old sketchbooks from grad school that I hadn't used and screen printed on them and made them into greeting cards. So I have saved a lot of collage materials. Yeah, so starting to try and use those, and as waste too, like with using patterns, we have that paper scrap. So doing collage with that. Here's another example. I cut these little hearts for Valentine's Day. And we just stuck them all over the city just with little love notes. So
yeah, it's a great reminder that it's something that is often so perceived as disposable, but actually it's such a wonderful resource for use, right? Yeah. And to think about too, like the reuse into greeting cards, that's a really exciting thing, because that is, a consumed art form, right? The greeting card is meant for taking, editing, adding your pieces, sending it off, having that kind of impact of experience with the recipient. And sure, maybe it's preserved and saved and, put up on a shelf or on a fridge or things like that. Or it might be one of those things that's recycled afterward. But there's really beautiful in that process of taking a second life even for these things that are like a calendar that is 100% consumable. Right? It is meant to be thrown away at the end of the year, and bringing the second life to it is really exciting.
Yeah, and bringing it 2 or 3 lives, right? So that's like, what do I have? What can I use again? And I love when people make art that people can make into their own art.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't send you guys an example of the greeting cards, but they're just the simple sacred geometry shapes.
Mm-hmm.
And he's gonna draw on them, watercolor, whatever. So you can sign up for my newsletter and I'll send out the before and after, or sign up for my Instagram before and after of here's this simple greeting card and then make it your own.
I love it. And I'm realizing we have the wrong banner scrolling across the bottom. Here we go. DivineLotusDesigns.com. Go check it out over there and sign up for the newsletter. And you can find the Instagram through there as well. Well, I want to talk a little bit about these sacred geometries that you incorporate into it. And I'm going to go ahead and zoom in on some of these greeting cards and have a few samples of it. Like right here and kind of these.
Flower of Life is what you're seeing there, and Metatron's Cube. So those are two-dimensional representations of a three-dimensional shape, right? So we can think about if we drew a triangle on a piece of paper versus a pyramid, and then if we turn the pyramid upside down, that's a square, right? So the shift in perspective and how things can move into the three-dimensional.
Yeah. What draws you to this type of imagery? What in sacred geometry really excites you and inspires you?
Oh, that's a rabbit hole, but it's basically the design of the universe. And when we understand that and we can see that in nature, we find inspiration everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really, I mean, it's beautiful, like design elements, to look at this type of, there's something so satisfying in it and so appealing that you're really drawn into through the symmetry and through the organization of it and the repetition of it. There's something that really speaks in a place that I don't deeply understand the context of the imagery, but I really feel things in response, which is kind of cool.
Absolutely. And that's where the science and the universal magic come together, where you're like, I understand it at a deeper level than my intellect. And we can go into the intellectual side, but you just see it and you're like, oh yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I want to jump in and talk a little bit about your daily art practice and your artistic flow. So tell us a little bit in your process of kind of playing with these fabric arts, the paper, the massage that comes into that you work on, and yoga and all those pieces. Tell us a little bit about your daily flow and how art comes into that.
I like the saying 5 at a time. So some people say 1 at a time. Like, oh no, I can't do that, but 5, right? So I've broken my 5 down into massage, movement, garden, art, and relationships. So trying to balance that pizza, that wheel, routine is really helpful. And finally, after however long, years and years, I feel like I've gotten into that. So I wake up pretty early in the morning. I go walk or run, do a meditation practice, do some movement right away. Movement first thing, brings in the energy, and then some art. Like, just do it first. So that you get it out of the way, you feel better, and then that supports the rest of your day. Tracking work is really important, and that's something that the artistic side doesn't like to do, right? You're like, keep track, no, measure things, iron, I don't want to do that. And then it's also like, acknowledging that part of it. So, right, like if we're making a quilt, which I don't quilt, so scientific, right? Like you gotta do the math and then you make the art. So one thing I want to share with people is this one line a day. So you could get one of these. It's a book that has, let's see here, like 5 lines for 5 years. So 2021, starting at the top, just make some notes about what you did for your art or just for your wellness or whatever you're interested in keeping track of, because we forget. And one thing about doing the mentorship program for me was a reminder of like, oh, I have done decades of work to get to this place.
Mm-hmm.
And to remind people like, okay, like just keep going, put those drops in the bucket and
Mm-hmm.
remember and reflect back. And we can't reflect back if we don't have anything to reflect back to. And
Yeah.
especially with technology, right? Like we have photos, but they're off on the cloud somewhere. We never really come back to them. So having that piece where it's like, oh, last year I was sketching, I was
Mm-hmm.
breaking through being a beginner, and wow, look how far I've come in a year.
Yeah. I love one of the pieces that I really hear in your art practice is the importance of wellness as a part of the art making process, right? That this movement that you talked about right at the top of the day and this journaling element or aspect of kind of the work that you're doing or documentation kind of pieces. And I heard relationships is one of your 5, right? What an important part of wellness that kind of comes into this. So it's, and also like even with the sacred geometry and some of the themes that I see in some of the artwork that you're working on, the wellness and this universal connectedness and the connectedness back to self feels really important in your work. What would you say is kind of like your philosophy around wellness?
Well, a quote that I heard from a podcast I was listening to this week that resonated with me was that the deeper we go on our personal journey, we're going to hit the universal. So we feel alone.
Might have lost you there just for a second. I'm sure she'll be back in just a sec.
Art is universal.
Yeah, you paused there for a second, Amber. Can you go back and tell us a little bit about that again? And if, I think it might have just frozen for a second.
Yep.
Tell us a little bit about that quote again.
So the deeper we go on our individual journey, we're going to hit the universal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we, in our personal art practice and in our spiritual practice, might feel alone, grappling with all these things that we're thinking, oh, it's just me. And then it's like, oh, yeah, everyone has dealing with this, and we can tap into that universal experience.
Yeah, I really resonate with that. I remember when I first started performing poetry, it was such a terrifying thing because it was so personal, and I was like, nobody's going to want to hear about this incredibly personal story, this incredibly personal experience or struggle, you know. And it was this all these voices in my head that were telling me it's not valid. And I remember the first time I got on stage and shared some poetry, the number of people who came up and were like, thank you for bringing voice to something I've been feeling for so long. And it's like, oh, like that idea of that I'm speaking from myself, but really what people hear is pieces of themselves as well, which is this universal experience that is humanity, right? And it's in art in its so many forms, especially when an artist does come from the space of self, it makes those connections and it helps us understand humanity on a deeper level. I love hearing that quote. It really connects for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it is so personal and it's so the human experience. So it's a both and. Like it's both my work and it's the work of the universe.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and also kind of in another thing that kind of hit in your description of your art practice and daily flow and in talking about your work with the students is these pieces that I think sometimes is also not fully known about the art making experience is that it's not just the act of, excuse me, I'm having an eye allergy reaction right now. So I might look like I'm crying, but it's just the truth. That some of your work that you do, that it's not just the act of the making of the art, right? It's not just the screen printing. It's not just the sewing or the painting. It's actually this flow of artistic management, of like creative flow through life. And that the meditation in the morning actually does lead to the art creation in the afternoon, that they are intrinsically connected. And that's sometimes a hard thing when people are like, oh, I tried to draw, but I just couldn't because I couldn't think of anything to draw. And, you know, like I'm feeling stuck with what even to express. And it's like, yeah, artists get there too. Like but those flows of what we find inspire us and feed our imagery and our creativity. Seems like it becomes really important. Would you say that some of those morning practices are essential to your art making? And have you seen disruptions when you don't have that kind of flow in your life to your art making?
Yes, absolutely. It's like it's a pizza wheel, right? So we need to address all the aspects of our life. So it's like, oh, if I haven't been addressing my exercise, then that flow gets blocked. And it's also a practice of tuning into what works for me. What is my rhythm? Do I work better in the morning? And opening to like what wants to come through today. So what I like to put on my schedule is meeting with the boss, which is me, right? But then it's an unspecified time that I deal with whatever feels easy, feels in flow. So in the past, we would say you're taking the path of least resistance, like that's being lazy, where it's like, no, today paperwork is I'm gonna do my billing, or I'm gonna do my bookkeeping, or I'm gonna whatever piece it is. Like, okay.
Yeah. And it opens you up, it sounds like, to the art making process, to get those pieces finished, to find those resolutions and find those kind of flows. Is that right?
Yeah, it's fine. It's doing the both and, right? Like, I know there's certain things I have to schedule that I'll never want to do. And also like moving in more into the creative brain of like what wants to happen, what wants to express itself today.
Nice. Well, you have one more piece of art here that I'm going to pull up, and I'd love for you to tell us a little bit kind of about what's going on in this piece.
Right.
And I can't zoom in on it, but tell us a little bit about. Yeah.
So this is more of what I'm moving into, is doing messy art. So as a massage therapist, as a master resiliency trainer, I'm not a trained psychologist or a therapist, but I do work with PTSD and trauma, both in myself and with my clients. And so starting to incorporate art therapy, and getting messy. So I love that Brene Brown says, I don't want to hear from anyone that isn't willing to get in the ring and get dirty. So if you're not in doing the work on yourself, I don't want to hear from you, right? So releasing judgment from the external world, from the Instagram, social media world, where it's like, no, you don't know. So this is something that I started doing as some prolonged exposure work, of where it's like I feel anxious making a mess, having it not be productive, having it not be profitable. So I took paper that I got in some products I received. So I'm recycling this paper, and then I'm just painting. I'm just exploring. I'm just letting things happen. And then we'll try and use this in another piece of art. Or maybe I'll recycle it, and I just got to have a moment where I vented through paint.
Yeah. I really love seeing this specific art piece juxtaposed with some of the earlier pieces that we saw, even just the other paper pieces, right? There's a lot of control and a lot of precision and clean lines that are in here. And to see that this one kind of explode with emotion and feeling and movement and chaos, and and hearing you describe that's kind of part of the intentionality, is letting it just be this freedom that exists in this piece. Those are really, they seem in opposition to each other, but in the mindfulness side that you're reflecting on, they seem very related to each other. So tell me about how you kind of see this work related to your previous work and vice versa.
Well, I would say from a healing perspective, we're working on left brain, right brain balance, right? So when we're in one side or the other, we're in fight or flight. But when we can get the hemispheres of the brain to connect, we can come back to center.
Yeah, love that. That's absolutely beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. So tell us a little bit about some of the other ways and how this is kind of you started talking about how your work and your art are evolving into this realm of the care and the not therapy but therapeutic type experiences. What other ways do you see your work and your art evolving?
I really would like to shift back into, as we open back up, hopefully, into helping people mend and repair their items, right? So re-empowering people, like, you're responsible for your health. You can be creative, all those things. Like, you can do that. I don't need to do that for you, but I can support you, and I have this space where I have thread and needles. So if you need to fix buttons, zippers, things that seem challenging, right? Like, so being with challenge, right? Being with uncomfortableness and realizing it's not as hard as I thought it was going to be. So mending workshops. I know that Bring was posting something about like a fix it. Like, let's fix the things that we have. And again, we're going into this renaissance of, we might be dealing with what we have. So let's use what we have. And also doing events with people. Again, being able to just like make art together, co-create, seeing things get taken out into the universe is great. And then personal art therapy. So more of experiential stuff, wild crafting, herbs, gardening. I also love plants, so I've been shifting to more growing flowers and things that can be dried and made into art again.
Yeah, I love it. It is really amazing to hear the different layers and pieces and parts that are incorporated into your artistic practice and the type of work that you do in the community. And to hear this common connection of care feels so essential in so much of the work that you're doing, from the care of product to the care of self to the care of community, is really powerful and really inspiring, and is so essential, I think, right now. We've had a tough year, to say the least. We've had a tough number of years as a society, as a community, and each of us grappling, depending on the identities that we hold, with very different experiences. That care is something that really is essential right now, to care for all of us or all of the people around us. And these artistic practices, whether it's as simple as helping somebody preserve their favorite pair of shorts by sewing their buttons back on, to that more meaningful and in-depth art, messiness, creation, exploration, to really reflect on self. It's a really inspiring experience and perspective on care. Is there anything else you'd like to add on kind of the perspective of care in your art?
Yeah, and I think being just held in community, that we're all going through this collective experience, and being able to process what it means to be a human in this time, and like how we can just hold space for that and express. And let me pull up really quickly an intuitive thing I tuned into today from my journal that said, art is not about being right.
I love that. So what would you say art is about then?
I would say art is about bringing your creativity out, working through emotions, feelings, thoughts, being able to process, and work with whatever is. So we say all is welcome. All is welcome.
Yeah. I love that. That's really beautiful. Well, you have shared so much and wonderful wisdom and insight into this idea of what is the realms of art making and what is the role of the artist in the process. So if people felt inspired today with some of the information that you provided and say want to give it a try themselves, what are some resources that folks can access in the community to take their part in reuse and upcycle art?
Well, I would say start with what you have at home. Look around. So today I was pulling out my patio furniture and my table fell apart. So I have this little woven bit that I'm going to work into some mixed media. Again, flowers, whatever is in your yard. And then Mecca, great resource, the thrift stores. I go to the bins now, the Goodwill bins. So it's like the bulk Goodwill. Like I can't even go to the regular thrift store. It's like under $1 a pound. Just save those materials from the landfill, right? It's a win-win. Yeah. Take a road trip. The closest one is in Salem, but we could start a petition for bins in Eugene. I would get on board with that. I would definitely knock on some doors.
I love it. I love it. Those are all fantastic. I love that you said start at home. I think that that's such a great idea.
Paper, yeah.
It's all there.
It's if you have a ripped up t-shirt, right? Tear it up, tie it, make a mobile.
I love it. The ideas are flowing. And it sounds like if anybody's really excited about some of the things that you have to offer down the road, again, check out divinelotusdesigns.com. Make sure you're on the newsletter, it sounds like, as well. Following you on all the socials.
Yeah, I'm mostly on Instagram. I try to not really be on social media. But again, there is inspiration out there. Tap into what inspires you and like get rid of the rest of it.
Yeah, I love it. Well, I just want to share a comment that came in. Of course, Mia Multiplied earlier shared with us that one of those earlier pieces you shared was absolutely beautiful. Lacey is here saying you are so inspiring. Thank you for sharing your personal world with the greater world. So thank you, Lacey, for tuning in. I have one final question here for you, Amber. Where are you finding inspiration right now?
So I don't know if we're going to post this below, but I shared a few links of people that I like. I would say if you're going to watch the Art 121 Louis Despont drawing video. So it just talks about simplicity. Again, what do you have? Do you have a journal? Draw in your journal, draw in your planner. You can draw in the mirror after you get out of the shower, right? So it can be really simple. And just how being committed to staying with something can go deep for you. So it's just magical.
Yeah.
And
I just walked and I felt the same way. I was just like, oh, yeah, this is lovely. It was like, I want to go find that thing. Yeah.
And it's an old video, and I followed her on social media, and now watching that evolve is just cool to see, and knowing that like there's some commitment and persistence, and like put the time in and you'll be rewarded.
Awesome. Well, one more little comment that came in. Judy Lippel said, excellent time spent listening. Thanks for tuning in, Judy. We're so excited to have you. Oh, Mom. Hi, Mom. Thanks for being here. Always the best when a parent shows up in the comments. So thank you all for tuning in. Amber, thank you so much for the incredible insight that you provided for us today in this great, rich conversation. I know I'm going to be walking away reflecting on some of those questions of what am I doing to care for myself and what am I doing to care for my community? And how can I use my artistic and personal practice to do that? That's something that I know I'm pulling away from this. So thank you for that gift. For all those who are tuning in, we will be back again next week with the live stream happy hour. Actually, we may be taking a week off next week. Stay tuned. We're going to find out. But we will definitely be back the week after with the live stream happy hour. So keep your eyes peeled out for the Lane Arts Council YouTube page or the Facebook page where we will be continuing to do live streams most Wednesdays around 5 o'clock. Amber, any final pieces before we sign off?
Oh, I am so thankful for everyone out there in our community. Keep it going. Just make some art for yourself.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Amber. Thank you all. We will see you again very soon. Adieu.